Who do you have to trade for in fantasy football and who needs to get off your roster right now? We'll go over all of that in this week's episode of the Fantasy Football Trade Desk. As a reminder, this video will cover some of my trade recommendations for this week. You can click the link below to get my full article with plenty more trade recommendations. In this video, I'll try to give you a couple recommendations that I think are both for immediate value, but also for some future value, a guy that you can get on your roster now and you could reap the benefits in the weeks ahead. So let's cover my 4 recommendations heading into week 9 of the NFL season. We'll start with the bad news and go over my sells for this week. And the first player that I am just straight up selling is Tennessee Titans wide receiver Calvin Ridley. Now this was the game I had to cover for Rotoworld, so I watched every single play of this game, and I watched as Calvin Ridley went over 100 yards receiving in the first quarter, a week after the Titans said they weren't going to force feed him targets. DeAndre Hopkins was traded away, and Calvin Ridley had 15 targets in the game, and the next highest Titans receiving option had just 6 targets. So Ridley was clearly a huge part of this offensive game plan. However, I think now is the perfect time to trade him away. You probably couldn't have gotten anything for him 2 weeks ago, and now you could get something for him coming off this big game. Mason Rudolph was playing over his head in the first quarter of this game. His production and Calvin Ridley's production noticeably fell off after that. Plus, I also think the Titans are going to put Will Levis back under center. They really need to decide if they're going to draft a quarterback in the first round of the 2025 NFL draft. So they need to give Will Levis more starts under his belt this year to determine if he could even be the guy for them, even though I think we probably know the answer for that. Will Levis being under center is going to tank Calvin Ridley's fantasy value like it did at the beginning of the year. So I think I'm looking to try to get pretty much anything for him right now. I think you could flip Calvin Ridley for a wide receiver in a more reliable role, like say Jacoby Myers or Darnell Mooney. Or if you're in a pretty good spot with your wide receivers but you need running back help, you could trade Calvin Ridley for a bench running back stash like Bucky Irvin or maybe even Isaiah Pacheco, who could potentially come back in the weeks ahead. And you could have that ability to stash Pacheco on your IR and maybe reap benefits of that and get rid of Ridley now for some value. The next sell recommendation is to run a process on a player, which is just when we explore the market for the player's value to determine if now is the right time to deal that player away. And so this week we are running a process on Jacksonville Jaguars running back Tank Bigsby. Now it's important to say that this is not a straight up sell recommendation. We are just exploring the market for Tank Bigsby. If you have Bigsby on your team, you shouldn't feel that you need to get rid of him. But I believe Travis Etienne will be coming back this week, and so now is the time to explore trading away Bigsby. Bigsby has emerged as the lead back in Jacksonville, and I think he is going to continue to be the early down workhorse for the Jaguars and keep that red zone role. So that is a valuable role. However, Etienne is going to take the passing down work. He's going to take the 2-minute drill work. So when the Jaguars are trailing, Travis Etienne is going to get more playing time than Tank Bigsby. I personally believe the Jaguars are going to be trailing more often than not in the remainder of the season. So I think that that's going to make Etienne more valuable than Bigsby in a lot of weeks. Since you likely scoop Tank Bigsby up on waivers, you might have some other running backs, and you could be looking to deal Bigsby for some wide receiver help. I think dealing Tank Bigsby for Tank Dell, who should continue to see usage with Stephon Diggs potentially out for the year in Houston, could be a really good value. You could also trade Tank Bigsby for Jalen Waddle, who should see his value increase with Tua Tagovailoa under center. And those are both trades that the Fantasy Life Trade Analyzer likes for the team getting the wide receivers. So those are some options I would look at if you have Bigsby on your team. Now, before I get to the players I'm buying for this week, pause this video, comment below, let me know which player you're trying to trade for or trade away, or ask me any start-sit questions, and I'll get to those as the week goes on. Like with our sells, we're going to have 2 types of buys this week, and the first is to buy the dip on Miami Dolphins running back Raheem Mostert. Now, I know it's weird to say buy the dip on a player who just scored a touchdown, but Mostert is still underperforming our expectations of him coming into the year and is clearly the backup in Miami. In Week 8, he played on 40% of the snaps. He handled just 33% of the rushes and ran a route on 38% of the dropbacks. This is Devon Achan's backfield. However, that's where the buying opportunity comes in for Mostert, because Mostert handled 100% of the rushing attempts inside the 5-yard line last week. That red zone role is not going away. It's the role he had last year. It's why he led the NFL in touchdowns last year. We expect this Miami Dolphins offense to be on the rise now that they are healthy with Tua Tagovailoa back under center. And so getting the red zone running back option on the Dolphins is certainly something that could be enticing for fantasy purposes. That role makes Mostert a fringe RB2 even without any additional value. We've already seen Devon Achane suffer a concussion once this year. If he gets injured again, Mostert would be on the RB1 radar in fantasy leagues. And so that's a player that's really valuable to have on your bench as a bye week or an injury fill-in, since he has the upside to be even more for your team. The last buy recommendation is to buy high on Tampa Bay Bucks tight end Cade Otton. We always focus on buying low on players, but buying high on players can often give you even more value, and those trades can often be easier to make because those fantasy managers are looking to get rid of the player thinking they're selling high. But you can buy because you think that there's future value ahead, and I think there's future value for Cade Otton. In the first week without both Mike Evans and Chris Godwin in Tampa Bay, Otton ran around on 84% of dropbacks with a 24% target share. He hauled in 9 of 10 targets for 81 yards and 2 touchdowns. And while those touchdowns may feel fluky, Otton saw 75% of the Bucks end zone targets. So he is going to be consistently peppered with targets in the red zone. And even on the season, he has a 19% target share. So if the fantasy manager in your league who has Cade Otton thinks that he's selling high on Otton because Mike Evans is going to come back in 3 weeks and Otton's production is going to go down, I think you're looking at a third-year tight end who is in the midst of a little bit of a mini breakout. And Otton could have fringe tight end 1 value for the remainder of the season, even with Evans back in the fold. So I think you could still trade for Otton if you are in a rough situation at your tight end spot. You could trade away Calvin Ridley to get Cade Otton if you have a lot of good other wide receivers. And those are trades that the Fantasy Life Trade Analyzer thinks the person trading away Otton is getting a better deal for. So I think you can use the Trade Analyzer here to push those deals across the finish line, because I like those deals if you're getting Otton and you have the wide receiver depth to spare. That's going to do it for this week of the Fantasy Football Trade Desk. As a reminder, you can click the link below to see the full article with all the rest of my recommendations. Also, click below to like and subscribe to get this video every week, plus the rest of our football and fantasy football content over at NBC Sports. And I'll see you next week for another episode of the Trade Desk. Happy trading.